Welcome to Fantasy F1 DFS 1 picks. Let's talk DraftKings Fantasy F1 optimal lineups. Maybe you're new to Fantasy F1, you'd like to play DraftKings, but you're not sure how to build the best lineup. So, what we'll do today is let's look at the Bahrain optimal lineup, the winning lineup, the best lineup that you could build. And then moving forward, we will look at the 2023 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix optimal lineup, and then also the 2022 lineup from the Jeddah Street Circuit. But first, it's Bahrain, and let's explain it. Joe is going to be your captain. He is incredibly cheap. He frees up a bunch of money. We talked about in previous videos last year, about 20% of the time you punted your captain. But the most part, you were taking that second tier, the non-Verstappen tier as a captain. Well, this happened to be a punt, super cheapy, allowing you to free up a lot of money. Joe simply works because Bottas had a 50-second pit stop at Bahrain. That'll do it. A lot of times your value drivers, they don't need to score a lot of points. He got 13 points. He actually had a pretty good day because he added in some place differential. Most of the time when we're taking our value driver, we simply want somebody that is cheap, and they're also going to get the versus bonus. And we can see Joe gets that. He also gets a place differential boost because he has a pretty solid race, driving from 17th to 11th. He doesn't get any finishing position points, but that is a very solid day. Typically from value, if we can just get the 5 versus points, we're good to go. And that's what we get with Kevin Magnussen. Now, early in the race, or at least pre-race, you would have thought the Haas guy to play, and we see Haas constantly in optimal lineups because Haas is the worst team, and so their drivers are the cheapest, and you simply just need to pick, is it going to be a Hulkenberg or a Magnussen week? It looked like it was going to be a Hulkenberg week because he was starting 10th, and then he wrecked on lap 1. And within that moment, it was over. It was going to be a Magnussen week. Magnussen does have a good day, finishing 12th for Haas, but really all that mattered was he got that 5-point bonus, and the same thing will probably happen again this week. Who will race better? It could be a challenge between Magnussen and Hulkenberg, or it could just simply be who doesn't have a mechanical issue, who doesn't have a pit issue, who does not wreck. So that explains Magnussen. Red Bull Racing goes without explanation. When you have Max Verstappen winning the race by 20 seconds and leading every lap, getting the fast lap, but he's too expensive, he doesn't work. You got Perez finishing second, combining with this Red Bull Racing constructor. Then we've got Sainz and Russell. Not really a surprise here. Sainz was cheaper than Leclerc, and Sainz passed Leclerc late in the run. George Russell hung on for another solid finish. No real surprises. We expected podium-ish finishes out of these 3 guys. You could afford them. Magnussen, we thought it would have been Hulkenberg, but Hulkenberg wrecked, so then it's a default to Magnussen. And Joe is the beneficiary of the Bottas issue, but Joe did have a decent race. Again, the biggest takeaway, not a lot of surprises. The only surprise was a normal surprise, which is the value doesn't always come down to who's the best driver, who's the fastest in practice. It's the one that avoids issues. Let's look at Saudi Arabia, the Jeddah Cornish circuit. And this high-speed track can produce some wrecks and some chaos. 2023. Let's look her over. Sergio Perez is going to be your captain. He was underpriced at 11,200. I know it's kind of steep. Maybe he wasn't undervalued, but this is a street circuit. He should have won in 2022, or at least been a podium in 2022. Has a handful, almost a handful of street circuit wins. No surprise, you're able to squeeze him in. Fernando Alonso, his price had come up, but we know that Aston Martin started the season out really strong last year. So again, not a surprise to see Alonso up there. He gets a podium. Where did he start the race at? He started second, and this is a track where you're probably not expecting a lot of overtakes. Qualifying is going to be a big deal. Now, it's not Monaco, but it is a tight street circuit. It is very fast. There's no tire degradation. There's only one pit stop. Not a lot of opportunities to undercut. With the guy starting up front, you can trust them to finish up front. I mean, we see that 2 years in a row from Esteban Ocon, and we'll talk about Ocon at the 2022 optimal lineup. But again, you see him with a starting position of 6th, finishing 8th. The Alpine does not fall off or fall apart, but he's not in the optimal lineup this year because he didn't need him. So then the rest of the picks, obviously, it's going to be Red Bull. And then you get Logan Sargent, Yuki Tsunoda, and Kevin Magnussen. So what's the story there? Why in 2023 do we have Logan Sargent? Well, it's Logan Sargent simply because Alex Albon has a mechanical issue. As I said before, a lot of times the value does not come down to the better driver. It comes down to the driver that doesn't suffer an issue. Albon has an issue, and so the cheapie in Logan Sargent becomes the default play. Starts 20th, finishes 16th, but most of those finishes are due to attrition, or at least other drivers' lack of attrition. So kind of hard to predict those, obviously. Then we get Tsunoda and we get Kevin Magnussen. Kevin Magnussen just simply outraces his teammate. Both of the Haas cars, believe it or not, were pretty strong in this race. But Magnussen is going to be the one that finishes a little bit better than his teammate. Hulkenberg finishes 12th. Magnussen finishes 10th with the point. And this team actually didn't really benefit from the safety car that came out. They just had decent cars and ran pretty well and held their own all day. And Magnussen was faster. That was that. Again, sometimes we think that we're going to get a break by, oh, this guy has a mechanical failure or an issue. But still, at the end of the day, especially with this Haas team, you hope that you pick the better driver on that given day. He gets a little bit of the bonus. And getting 3-place differential points for this 2-place differential, not really the biggest stretch when we figure that there's going to be mechanical issues. There's going to be pit road issues for some people. It doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, he went out there and overtook 3 cars or had a perfect undercut. What happened is more than likely somebody had some issues and you're going to grab some spots. Maybe you get a pass or two. Maybe you get some cars wrecking out. But to get 3-place differential points, really not that difficult. You add on the 5 with the versus bonus at 3,200, he's going to be optimal. And I would imagine here in the 2024 Jeddah Corniche circuit, we're going to have a battle between the Haas's, and A, either one of the Haas's is going to have an issue, or B, one will just simply outrace the other, and they're going to end up a piece of the optimal lineup. Let's look at our other values. You got Yuki Tsunoda, really cheap at 3,400. Pretty much a steal. Now, first of all, you got to remember who was Yuki's teammate at this time. It was the struggling Nick DeVries. And so, really not a stretch to think that Yuki could defeat DeVries at 3,400. You're going to get the 5 points. More than likely, if he avoids issues, which you need him to do to get in the optimal lineup, he's going to get you 3-place differential. But also, he benefits from staying out long enough and catching the safety car. And he actually catapults all the way inside the top 10. He'll concede some of those spots, but hangs on for the 11th place finish. So, A, you knew going into the race he's facing DeVries, so that's good. B, he did catch that safety car that really helped him clear his teammate. So there's these little events that you really just can't predict that are going to factor in with your value plays. Now, as far as picking like an Alonso, you don't really have to be able to get lucky with safety cars and cautions, and guys like Sergio Perez you predict on the pole to run away with the race. But for the values, there's going to be events that we cannot control and that you're going to want to build around. And so last week you may have loved Hulkenberg starting way in front of Magnussen. You do need to remind yourself that yes, speed matters, yes, racing matters, but often is the case that these value drivers are circumstantial when it comes to optimal lineups. It comes down to pit stops. It comes down to that first lap wreck. It comes down to mechanical issues. Remind yourself as you're constructing so that you don't just say, I'm only going to play Hulkenberg. Maybe mix in some Magnussen. Let's look at the 2022 Jeddah Street Circuit. Optimal lineup, again, to help us build. Now, if you want to look more at the construction of lineups in terms of how many expensive drivers, what do the captains look like, how many value guys, there is a video on my page that you can check out. Please like, subscribe, and share the videos. This one's not as good to look at because it's 2022, second race at DraftKings for F1, and you can see that Max Verstappen at 10,800 is a joke. Way too cheap. Verstappen this week is 16,200. But back then, you could afford him. You could afford Leclerc. You may remember the cat and mouse DRS battle between the two of them at the end of the race. Very fun, very exciting after a really phenomenal Bahrain race that saw Leclerc sort of win that cat and mouse battle, although Leclerc probably had a better car, and then Verstappen had a mechanical failure at the very end. But they came back the next week at Jeddah and had a wonderful race, and Verstappen wins. And you get Ocon as your captain because Ocon is very affordable. And you may say yourself, if you play fantasy NASCAR or other sports, you might have been concerned. I don't know if I trust Ocon. If he is fast enough to progress to Q3 and then qualify in fifth, especially at this high-speed circuit where there's not going to be a lot of overtakes, there's not a lot of opportunities to play games, and if you can just keep it off the wall, you're going to maintain position. That's what Ocon does, and he brings it home. So going into the 2024 Jeddah race, if we get an Ocon or someone that is a mid-pack driver that is qualifying inside Q3 in a spot like this, I believe you can trust them, and I would definitely take the value and really consider putting them in my captain spot. So you got Ocon, has a good race. Ferrari obviously is going to take it because if you remember this race, it probably was going to be a Verstappen, maybe Checo, Leclerc day, but Perez just pits a lap later and gets kind of cheated or screwed by a safety car, and he ends up cycling out into fourth place. That leads to two Ferraris on the podium with signs. Again, not always is the case that the top tier drivers in your lineups, their speed and their skill will determine how many points they get. They too can be affected by the circumstances and the situations that unfold in a race. And this was a case where Perez just misses out. And so then we end up with Ferrari as our constructor as opposed to Red Bull. Then we get Nico Hulkenberg and Alexander Albon. And both of their positions are pretty simple to explain. It wasn't very hard in 2022 to pick Alexander Albon because Nicholas Latifi was always having bad races. You can see Nicholas Latifi only completed 14 laps before he crashed out, which can happen at this very tight manufactured street circuit by the water. Latifi doesn't make it, so Albon makes it, but then Albon even goes on to wreck later on in the race. But at least he completes 47 laps. And who does he wreck with? Well, he happens to wreck with or cause damage to Lance Stroll. And because Lance Stroll is damaged and does not complete all the laps, then we see a guy that no one really expected to do something, because Sebastian Vettel was out of the car that week. Nico Hulkenberg out of nowhere flies in and is subbing. Although he's not completely out of nowhere, he had flown in and did the Bahrain race for Haas the week before because of the whole Ukraine war thing going on and Haas firing their Russian driver. So Hulkenberg wasn't completely cold, but he wasn't necessarily prepared. And this is a wild street circuit that is very challenging and very overwhelming. And to jump in cold, although the drivers had only raced here once before, most of them, aside from their F2 experience. But that said, they did race here. It was the penultimate race of 2021, so it was fresh in some of their minds. Either way, no one really expected Nico Hulkenberg to compete, and he wasn't really competing, but because he didn't make any mistakes, and his teammate made a big mistake, Hulkenberg finishes 12th, and so Hulkenberg ends up in the lineup mainly because his teammate did not run very well. Albon ends up in there because his teammate did not run very well. I'll give credit to Hulkenberg. He had a pretty solid race. But you can't completely ignore that there was attrition involved. And when you are building your lineups and you're building for value, a lot of it's going to come down to events that you cannot necessarily predict. That first lap wreck, that last lap wreck, that mechanical failure, the bad pit stop, the poor strategy call that cycles them into the wrong spot. Those are things that you're just going to have to accept and deal with. Your top tier drivers are more than likely not going to be as affected by those types of events. Hopefully this helped you. And if you are ever interested, you can check out DK Network. That's where my free Fantasy F1 DFS Picks article comes out every week. Please click share. Let's boost that thing up in the SEO. Like, subscribe these videos, share these videos, go play some F1 fantasy. Again, if you want to see another video where I specifically talk about the structure of building winning lineups and optimal lineups for DraftKings F1, it's on my channel. Check it out. Blessed to have you guys around. Love you guys. Trip to Light's fantastic.